Hi everyone and welcome to another episode of Gaffer and Gear. In this video we're going to be looking at the 300D Mark II from Aputure. This unit boasts an all-in-one power supply and controller which runs completely silent. The unit is a 300 watt LED cob light with Bowens Mount. In this video we're going to have a look at the Barndoors and also have a look at the Fresnel 2X attachment. The unit boasts very good colour rendition and is comparable to a 575 HMI. Alright, before we go much further into the video, this is not a final release product, this is pre-release product. Pretty much it's all as the finished product's going to be, with one exception, and that is the reflector. So with this first batch of reflectors, they were made slightly undersized or pressed slightly undersized, which means they wobble. And as you can see with the optional barn doors on the front, the whole unit sags. So that creates a dark spot in the center of the beam. If you rotate the barn doors fast enough, they come off as well. So Aputure are working on this. So this won't be the case when they've got the finished product made. But I do have to point it out because at some point in this video, if you're very astute to seeing what's going on, you would notice that this is moving around and not lining up properly, but they are going to fix that. Now let's talk quickly about the build quality, and pretty much with the exception of the prototype reflector, the build quality on everything else is absolutely immaculate, well above the price point. I think in terms of showing off how beautifully engineered everything is, I think the clamp that mounts the controller to the stand is the best thing to use as an explanation. So you can see here it expands out on rods. So what basically, instead of opening up like that and not getting a proper catch on big stands, it's pressing on both sides. Now just a little simple thing like this actually fits every single light stand I own. So I own small stands up to wind-up stands. This fits the center column on a wind-up stand, and it also fits a scaff pipe or a speed rail. So that's really well thought out. But in terms of the engineering, check this out. You're not going to believe this. Watch this. Okay, I'm not joking there. Have a look at that. Now let's stick this onto a bit of speed rail and just see how well it grips. Check this out. Okay, that really, I think, sums up the engineering that's gone into this unit. Okay, so a 300D Mark II kit is going to sell for about the $1,200 US mark. So what do you get for your $1,200? Well, you get the lamp head, of course. You get the power supply and controller, which is all built into one. You get the now legendary clamp for the stand mount. You get a 3-meter head lead connector. You get a 6-meter Nutrix power connector. You get a 55-degree reflector, and you get a remote control, and it all comes in a bag. Now this bag looks deceivingly soft, but I weigh 82 kilograms and I can stand on it. So this thing can easily withstand a baggage handler. The other thing with this bag is that all the padding is custom. So everything fits together nicely and nothing's going to get damaged rattling around. Now apart from the super strong bag, Aputure supply a few other things to protect your investment, such as a protective cover for the cob. The reflector is also supplied with a plug. So why would you want a plug inside your reflector? Well, should you get a lot of weight on top of your bag, the plug will stop the reflector from being crushed out of shape. Now let's talk about the cabling that comes with the unit. So the standard head lead that comes with it is 3 meters. Now this is a 5-pin XLR, basically a standard 5-pin XLR connector. So it's not hard to find one if you need to have a replacement in a hurry. Now what I like about these is they can interconnect, so you can link multiple head leads together to get the light further away from the transformer. That comes in handy if, say, you're sticking it on a menace arm, for example. Now Aputure do have an option for a 7.5 meter lead, which is the maximum distance you can run. Now, in terms of the power running into the transformer and controller, it is running in via a Nutrix connector. So if you're not familiar with Nutrix connectors, basically Nutrix connectors are replacing these horrid things, these IEC leads. The problem with IEC leads is they can be pulled out really easy, and basically you're in the dark. But with a Nutrix connector, it goes in and it locks, so it can't accidentally be removed. So huge advantage there. Now, the other thing I really like about these cables is they are made from rubber or silicon. Rubber and silicon cable is heat resistant. So basically, if you're using this light, say in a lighting grid, and the light next to it is a hot light, like say a 1K or a 2K tungsten, and whoever's doing your rigging does something stupid or something accidental, like run the cable over the top of the hot light, the heat from that hot light will not melt this cable. Whereas if the unit came with cheap PVC cable, which is what a lot of other manufacturers do, you would have the risk of that cable melting. So this is a nice little safety feature that I think most people wouldn't notice. Now, just coincidentally, I happen to have one of my vans unloaded and all my power cabling is sitting to the side here. You can see it is all heat resistant rubber cabling. Now, one thing I almost forgot to mention is the AC power lead is a very generous 6 meters. So that's one less power extension lead you need to carry around in your kit. Okay, next up, let's have a look at the controller. And basically, this is the power supply and controller all in one. And look, I have to say, this is easily the best power supply, controller, ballast, whatever you want to call it. This is easily the best one I've come across for a mono light. Now, things I like about it, it's got DMX in and out and professional 5-pin, not that 3-pin rubbish, as well as a Nutrix connector down the bottom. Now, it'll run off a single V-lock or it'll run off 2 V-locks. It's got wireless control via Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, but there's no antennas that are going to get knocked off. Basically, the antenna's built into the top here. And it's really just slick. Now, the one thing I like about it is it doesn't have any knobs that stick out from it. And that's really important because you know, it basically limits the ability for it to get damaged. So if that had a big knob sticking out, it would get smashed. So not only is it compact, but a lot of thought's gone into making it durable. Now, one thing I really like about it, no cooling fan anywhere on it. Okay, so it is absolutely silent running. So anyway, let's plug it in and basically stick a battery on it. So I said it can run off 1 or 2 batteries. Now, if you have a look, you'll see the V-mount on this side's black and the V-mount on this side is red. So the red side is the side you've got to plug your battery onto if you're running one single battery. So let's stick that on and have a look. Okay, fire up. Okay. Now, on the front display, it says, you know, it'll give you its percentage reading and it goes up to 100%. Now, when you're running off a single battery, it only runs at half brightness, but it still goes up to 100% on the display. So it still gives you 100 increments of adjustment. Now, if you plug a second battery onto the other side, it will auto detect that there are 2 batteries and the light will jump to twice as bright. So let's have a look. Bang, there we go, so twice as bright. Now I'm going to get back to talking about the batteries in a sec, but first off I just want to talk about one thing I think they've really nailed with this, and that is the cable orientation. So if you've got it on a stand, this is fantastic because the cable coming out the top goes to the light and everything else plugs into the bottom. Okay, now what I'm not a huge fan of, which a lot of people are doing with their designs, is cables that come out the sides. Okay, so the problem with this is it's a snag hazard, okay? So when you've got them coming out the top and the bottom, it's not a snag hazard. Now, the reason a lot of people don't make their ballasts or their transformers or controllers with connections in the bottom is, of course, when you stand them up, you can't plug into the bottom. So look, Aputure have just gone, well, here's the simple solution to that. Basically put feet and have it sitting down, sitting this way up. Now the reason they can do that is because this thing is not fan cooled, it's passively cooled. So it can operate that way up, doesn't make any difference. Now what I like about this orientation with the cables is it's not a tip hazard, okay? So if someone walks along and basically trips on this cable, it gets pulled that way. If they trip on this cable, it gets pulled that way. The unit doesn't tip. Whereas if it's sitting up, say, this sort of orientation and plugged into the sides, or plugged into the top like that, someone trips on the cable, smash, okay? So not only is it an elegant design feature, it's also protecting it. You know, it's making it harder for this to get damaged, so longevity again. Now here's something I like that sets this controller apart from all the others. It is currently running off AC power, so it's running off a power outlet. But you can have your V-Lock batteries plugged in, and these can be your power backup. So let's say you're doing a live cross for television and you're running the light off a little generator along with everything else. If the generator conks out, the batteries will take over. Now this isn't seamless, there is a bit of a flash, but you're still on the air. Now, when it comes to running this thing off batteries, Aputure recommend a minimum 190 watt-hour battery. Now, I would be going bigger than that. So if you're buying batteries specifically for it, I would go maybe a 260 watt battery as your minimum. Now, I'm just going to show you something with this unit when running it off batteries. And this is superb. So when you're running it off batteries, up in the corner of the display, you get an estimate of how much time is remaining on your battery run. So as you can see here, when I change my brightness level, the estimate changes. So let's see if that clocks in, bang. So let's change it again and recalculate. Bang. Okay, now I've been using this thing for about 2 weeks, testing it out, seeing how it runs. And I can tell you that initially, that estimate is very conservative. So when you put the batteries on, it's sort of a worst case scenario reading that you get. Now, if you've been using it for about 20 minutes, you can actually set a timer to the duration that's left. It is really accurate, usually accurate to within about 40 seconds. All right, so let's get into operating this thing now. And this controller is extremely easy to operate. So on the front of the controller, you've got this wheel. So basically that wheel controls your dimmer. That's pretty straightforward. The wheel also controls your menu navigation. So in the center of the wheel, you've got a button here to press to get into menu, and then you can just scroll up and down. And then whatever it is you want to change, you can press the menu button and you're into that part of the menu. So to exit the menu, you can just press the lighting button and you're back out, or you can scroll back through the menu until you find exit. Now, just going through the controls here. So on the top of the 4 buttons here, you've got your basic lighting controls. So lighting, channel, group, and wireless. And down the bottom, you've got all your special effects options. Now, to scroll between your special effects options and your normal lighting options, you just press the lighting button. So you just hold that down, and now you're in the effects menu. So all the bottom row applies. And to switch back, basically you just hold that button down again until you're into the main menu system. Now let's just go through the buttons here. So channel, as you can see there, it changes the channel number. Okay, so you've got a choice of 3 channels. And on top of that, you've also got a group. So group A, B, C, and D. Okay, and wireless over here, that determines what sort of wireless control system you're using, whether it's Wi-Fi, which is this, or Bluetooth, which will be the phone app, which I don't have at this stage. So basically you press that button, wireless, and you can see it scrolls through. So Bluetooth, nothing connected, and your Wi-Fi. Now the channel and remote selection is quite good. So at the moment I've got this set to channel A, to group A. So I just press group A button and I can turn everything in that group off. So you can have 4 groups of lights and 3 channels in each group. So for example, you could have a scene shooting in a kitchen, you could have a scene shooting in the living room, and you can turn each scene on and off. And that's something I really like, the fact you can turn the lights on and off via the control and the whole thing shuts down. Now the dimmer control on the remote is actually quite good. So let's have a go here. So you can do individual increments, okay? Or you can hold a button down and it scrolls. Okay, so very sharp, very easy to use, very good. Now, I tried to see what the range is on this. So basically, I stuck this in the corner there, opened up my garage and went for a walk down the street. And this thing works reliably up to 120 meters. So I think it's about 3 and a bit feet per meter if you're still imperial measurement. So it works a heck of a long way away, and that's reliably. Past 120 meters, I had to stand up with my hand above my head to get the range. So you can go further, but reliably at 120 meters. All right, so let's have a look in the effects menu. So to get from your normal lighting menu to your effects menu, just hold down the lighting button. And now we're in the effects menu, which is the bottom selections. Okay, now to change your effect, you just keep pressing the effect button. So that's TV, pulsing, so on and so forth. So let's get back to lightning, because that one's a bit of fun. All right, now here you can select your frequency, or you can select your intensity. Now, if I want to select my intensity, how bright it is, I just press the intensity button, and then I can use my wheel to scroll. Okay, so that's how I select my intensity. Now, let's say I want to change my frequency. At the moment, it's on R, which is random, okay, but it also has to trigger. We'll talk about that in a sec. So if I want to select my frequency, I just press the frequency button, and now I can select how often it happens. So it's on a scale of 1 to 10. And 1 to 10, and then R is for random. Now, with your lightning effect, you can actually trigger when it individually happens. So on the end here, you've got a trigger button. When you press that down, the lightning effects trigger. Okay, so there are effects where you can just press the button and it goes off when you want it to go off. That's pretty cool. Now, if you have an effect like lightning that triggers and you want it to run on a cycle, basically what you do then is hold the trigger button down and it'll indicate that it's cycling at the random frequency. So let's change our frequency. Let's get a bit of a storm happening. Let's set it to a frequency of 10 out of 10. And now it's rolling the effect over quite frequently. All right, the light has a whole stack of effects. I'm not going to bother going through the whole lot. All right, so one thing I will show you on the display is there's a little box in the corner here with a line running through it. So what that means is the dimmer is set to linear. Okay, so we're going to go into the menu system and show you what's going on here. So press menu. Okay, now I've already got dimmer curve selected, so I'll press the menu button again and enter that. Now you can select whether your dimmer runs exponentially, logarithmic, S-curve, or linear. So let's change this to, let's say, logarithmic. So just scroll around, so just scrolling around using that. Logarithmic, enter that. Okay, exit the menu system. Now you can see on the front of the menu, it tells you that it's a logarithmic curve. So this is really handy. So when you're using the multiple systems, you can see visually they're all set to the same dimmer preference, which is something you can't do on more advanced lights like, say, the sky panel. Okay, so let's go through the menu system, and that's pretty straightforward to operate. So to get into the menu system, you just press the menu button, and now you can scroll up and down with your wheel. So to start off with, let's have a look at DMX. So basically DMX, you can select your channel up to 512 channels. Now, with the DMX, it does run using 5 channels of DMX. So channel 1 is your dimmer. Channel 2 selects whether you've got an effects mode turned on or off. Channel 3, the values can select your effects. Channel 4 is the intervals of effect, and channel 5, the data on that you can use to select whether you're manually triggering the effect or not from a DMX console. So what's really good with this is in the instruction book is all the DMX addressing. So if you've got some reasonably fancy or sophisticated DMX software, you can easily set up a profile for this unit. So in terms of the DMX, everything works on it. I've had a quick play with it. But the only thing I'll point out, and it's not a criticism, it's just a fact, if you say have it set to 100% and then you select 50% on your DMX controller, the unit fades down to 50%. It doesn't just go bang to 50%. So that's something to bear in mind. Again, not a criticism, just a fact. Okay, so let's have a look at the next thing on the menu system. So press menu to exit there, dimmer curve. So we've sort of covered that, but I would like to go back into dimmer curve and change back to linear. Change my dimmer back to linear, there we go. Next is fan mode. So in the fan mode, you can basically, you've got a choice of force, which basically means it's running all of the time, or you can go to auto. So let's select auto, and in auto, basically as it suggests, the fan speed runs automatically. Now, I've got to say, this thing running in force mode, full blast, you can barely hear it. So I pretty much would never run this thing on auto. I would always run it at force. So I'm just going to change that back to force before I forget. Okay, next is studio mode. So what is studio mode? So studio mode gives you a choice of yes or no. So basically with studio mode, if you have yes selected, as soon as this device gets power, it will turn on. So for example, you might have 5 or 6 of these in a studio set, or this might be amongst all your lighting grid. When you come in and turn your 3-phase power on or your master power switch on, all of these will turn on automatically if the studio mode is selected to yes. So basically, if you're an old school gaffer, the studio mode is the equivalent to local remote on the front of your old HMI ballasts. Okay, so let's continue through the menu system. So let's select no for that. Okay, next down is Bluetooth reset. So that's basically if you're using it off your mobile phone. Language, yeah, don't mess around with that. USB mode. So USB mode can select whether you're doing a firmware update or not. Okay, so that's on the side of the unit. There's a firmware update port or a USB port. Okay, so that's basically it. It's a pretty simple unit to operate. It's really well constructed, silent running, and I do honestly believe this is the best mono controller I've come across. Is it perfect? Well, for me, no. It does have one thing that's missing. And this is something that probably will affect nobody watching this video unless you're a professional gaffer. And what it's missing is a DC power inlet. So you can power this off your AC power, so basically your mains power. You can run this off the battery mounts on the side, but you can't run it off an external battery. So that's about the only limitation of the system. And like I've said, it pretty much affects next to nobody unless you're a professional gaffer. All right, so let's start talking about the light head itself now. So first thing I've got to say is all of the care and attention to detail that we've already seen, that's all in the lamp head as well. This is fantastic. So look, I'm going to start off with a few questions that have been asked by viewers. So about a month back, I did a little teaser video saying I had this in for testing. Give me some of your questions. So one question I got asked was the lock off is very small. Can it actually take the weight off of a big modifier? Now, if that was, say, a clutch plate, which uses pressure to hold it in place, there is no way that could take a lot of weight, but it is not a clutch plate. This is actually a disc brake. So it's got a disc and it gets pinched from both sides to stop it from moving. So I think the best way to answer the question as to whether this lock off can support a lot of weight is to go a little bit extreme. Okay, so this is a 12.5 kilogram shot bag. Okay, so there we go. So that's holding a 12.5 kilogram shot bag and the lock off is not moving. Okay, so I don't think you're going to have any modifiers that weigh more than 12.5 kilograms. So I got a lot of questions about the actual Bowens mount. Does it fit Bowens Mount stuff correctly? Does it slap around? Does it properly align? And I totally hear you. I've bought cob lights in the past when they first came out, and genuine Bowens stuff didn't fit properly. So look, let's just try it out with a genuine Bowens S-mount reflector. So look, mounts no problem. Look, there's a bit of play in there, otherwise you wouldn't be able to get it on, but it's definitely not slack. It's lined up to the center properly, as you can see there. Let's fire it up and have a look, see if we've got an even beam out of this reflector. Okay, so we've definitely got an even beam. Let's see how the Barndoors cut. Okay, so pretty much everything's working as I would expect. So yes, it does properly line up to Bowens accessories. All right, so the next thing a lot of you asked me was, is this unit actually quieter with its 2 cooling fans running as opposed to other units running with 1 cooling fan? So Aputure's logic here is they're both running at different speeds, noise cancelling each other out. I've got to say, it feels to me like this unit isn't as loud as some of the others I've tested. Okay, so the next most common question I got asked was, does this light have any colour fraying on the edge of the beam? So let's turn off my key light and have a look. All right, so that's pretty much the viewer questions out the way. So let's talk about the head. There's not a great deal to talk about because basically it's an LED light and the rest of it is the cooling system. There's not that much on there. Look, differences between this and some other brands. This does have a really good field of angle that you can operate it on. And the one thing that really does separate it from other brands is the fact that the cob is extremely well protected. It's behind a glass plate. So just to give you an example, here's a pen. Okay, I wouldn't dare try that with the opposition's lights. It would be a complete write-off. But Aputure have taken that little bit of extra care to protect your investment. Now the downside to this, and it's only a marginal downside, is this extra bit of protection here does snoot and reduce the beam angle a little bit. But having said that, it's still got a tremendous beam angle. So let's have a look. So as you can see, there's still plenty of spread. Okay, so how did it hold up when I tested it? Well, let's talk about the unit with no modifier on it. Basically, like it is now, raw cob. Okay, so at 3 meters, this thing was spitting out 1,390 lux. So to put that in some perspective, that is 85% the brightness of a 575 HMI Fresnel. Now again, that is with no modifier on it, raw cob, so that's not too bad. Okay, now the only thing I sort of didn't really like about this unit was the CCT, or the color temperature point. So Aputure advertised this thing as being 5,500 Kelvin plus or minus 200 Kelvin. So this unit definitely falls within that. This unit came in at 5,361 Kelvin. So what does that mean? Well, basically the key light here is spitting out 5,640 Kelvin. So take a look at the color of the wall behind me. When I turn this light on, that'll be slightly warmer. So let's have a look. So when I asked Aputure why they're leaning towards slightly warmer, they had a pretty good response. It's what their customers want. So I suppose that's the key to success, really, making a light that your customers want. For me, I prefer my Kelvin a bit bluer or a bit higher Kelvin, so it matches into HMIs. But if you're not running HMIs, then that's not really a concern. You'll probably like the warmer skin tones that you get off this unit. Now, okay, so that's the unit with no dish on. Okay, so let's have a look at the unit with the dish on. So basically, the unit comes with a faceted reflector dish. Now, I just got to point out, this is not the finished product, so basically, don't pay too much attention to these figures. Now, when you put the dish on, it reduces to a 55-degree beam angle and gives you over double the intensity. So it's actually 2.2 times brighter. Now, my suspicion is with the finished reflector, it'll be brighter yet again because I would expect this one to be brighter than it currently is. Now, at 3 meters, this jumps to 3,080 lux with the reflector on. Now, to put some perspective into how bright that is, let's compare it to the 575 HMI Fresnel. This unit now comes in 88% brighter. Now let's compare that to a 575 HMI par, matching up the beam angles, so that's a number 3 lens, 3 out of the 5 in the lens kit. This unit is 89% the brightness of a 575 HMI par. So yes, it realistically compares to a 575 HMI. Now let's talk about some of the accessories you can chuck on the front of this. Now I'm not going to talk about their dome light softboxes. I'm going to do that in another video because they are worthy of doing their own video on. But one thing I would recommend you get for this is the Barndoors kit. It only costs 85 US bucks. So relatively speaking, it costs nothing, but it gives you a whole stack of control over the unit. So I'll just show you what comes in this. Well, first off, you get a black dish. So the reason you get a black dish is so that the cob is the only light source. You don't get multiple shadows from the cob and a silver reflector. You only get the one set of shadows from the cob. So let's chuck that on. The next thing that comes in the kit, a honeycomb, 30-degree honeycomb. So I'm quite surprised that Aputure chucked this in. But I suppose that's Aputure giving you extra value. So I'll just show you what the honeycomb does. So let's terminate our key light. Okay, so basically it just reduces it to a 30-degree beam. It's still a hard light. Okay, Okay, still hard shadows, but it has a soft edge. Okay, so that's basically the honeycomb. Now here's the thing, it is very, very close to the cob, and it is a 300 watt cob. So that honeycomb is going to get warm, and it is going to smoke for probably about the first 3 or 4 times that you use it. That is normal. So what I'd recommend you do, it's something that us gaffers used to do in the old days with our hot lights, is basically smoke them, which basically means run them until they don't smoke anymore. That way you don't set off smoke alarms at locations and have fire trucks come. So that's a little big tip for you. Okay, the next thing of course you get with the unit is the barn doors. Now the barn doors are felt coated, so you don't get any light bouncing off the barn doors. And the unit basically spring locks in place. So it just slips on top of the unit. So it slips on top of the dish. There we go, and just spring lock it. Now let's have a look at the quality you get off this. So let's dim the key light down, and let's see if we can create a slash. So there you go. So you get very, very good control over the unit. But not only that, the shadows being from the single cob, the shadows are very, very sharp, very, very sharp. So look, I think that's really, really worth the 85 US dollars. Now, one thing I almost forgot to mention is that the barn doors have a gel holder on the front that is held in place with magnets. So I'm actually quite surprised, I've run this with a CTO in it. I'm actually quite surprised that the light didn't melt the CTO. So it seems to hold up okay. But yeah, so look, definitely worth the 85 bucks. Now, the most questions I got asked were about this unit, okay, which is the Fresnel 2X or the 2 times. The most common question I got asked was by people who own 575 HMI Fresnels. Will this replace your 575 HMI Fresnel? And the answer is no. It's a very different tool, okay? So initially, this is going to sound very negative, but I would recommend getting this. But optically, this does not do what a HMI Fresnel does, or a tungsten 650 or a tungsten 1K. So let's stick it on and I'll show you what I mean. Now let's put on the barn doors. So the barn doors I showed you earlier, the barn doors fit the Fresnel. So the barn doors are universal. They fit the Fresnel, they fit the reflector that comes with the unit. So that's pretty cool. So again, just even more reason to spend the 85 bucks on the barn doors. So let's chuck these on. Okay, now let's try and get a slash like you can get out of a HMI Fresnel or a 575 HMI Fresnel. Let's have a look. This is the best slash you're going to get. Okay, so it's got some optical control, but it's not fantastic. And the shadows basically don't look all that Fresnel-ish. Okay, so if you're buying the Fresnel mount, expecting it to basically turn this unit into a HMI Fresnel equivalent, or basically a purpose Fresnel head, you're going to be disappointed. Basically, if you're not familiar with old school Fresnel units, they basically barn door slash like this did when it just had the barn door with the black dish. Okay. Now, having said all that, I would still highly recommend getting this. So initially I was a bit disappointed with it, but then when I had to play with it, I totally understood it was a different tool to a HMI Fresnel head, a very different tool. So the best way to explain it is imagine a HMI PAR, so something like an M8 or an M18 that doesn't require lenses, something you can flood spot, okay? Now this unit floods and spots, okay? Now it floods and spots with better optics than a HMI PAR, okay? So this is somewhere between a HMI PAR and a HMI Fresnel in terms of optically what it does. But as a flood spot attachment, this is fantastic. So basically in full flood, which is 40 degrees, this thing jumps the light at 3 meters to 5,640 lux, okay? So with the Fresnel attachment on, you get 4 times more light than you do out of the bare cob. Now that's in flood. Now when you spot it up, you get 8.6 times more light. Okay, so this goes to 12,000 lux at 3 meters. So to give you some idea of what I'm talking about, the optical quality of this thing, here are some photos out the front of my house. So this is the unit in flood, and this is the unit in spot. So you can see it's very similar to a HMI PAR, except it's got way better optics, but the optics aren't as good as a HMI Fresnel, but definitely worth spending the money on. Now, the next load of questions I got asked about this unit is, does it have any problems with spill light? So let's point it up into the roof, put it into full spot, and turn off the key light. So as you can see, no, it doesn't. All the light's bouncing off the roof, no light leak around the unit at all. So yeah, they've solved that problem. Look, definitely worth buying as a spot attachment. I reckon particularly if you're using, say, you're outdoors and you want a back edge, that's a lot of power. 12,000 lux at 3 meters, that's a lot of firepower, so definitely worth getting. Okay, so another question I was asked is, will this telescope or collapse in under its own weight? Well, you can't even push it in. So the only way it'll go in is if you rotate. Vice versa, if you point it down, you can't pull it out, okay? It'll only move if you deliberately move it. Right, one thing I'd better point out before we move on is a lot of people are going to think it's impossible that a Fresnel mount can increase the light level that much, because a lot of common logic is if you put a lens in front of something, you actually reduce the amount of light. So I'll just explain why this increases the light so much, and that's because it's dual optic. So there's a magnifying glass in here throwing and increasing the light level onto the front piece of glass. So you don't have light getting wasted hitting the exterior of the shell. The maximum amount of light possible is getting onto the front lens. Okay, so now we've talked about the dual lensing, I can answer the next question that was asked by viewers. And geez, you guys asked some good questions. So the question was asked, is there any chromatic aberration when you're spotting up due to the double lens system? Pretty much in terms of the transmission of light through the lens, whether in flood or spot, with the exception of Kelvin change, there is nothing at all, nothing else is changing. There is a very, very subtle change in the individual CRI scores. We're talking thousandths, so you know, not 10%, not 100%, but a thousandth, so a decimal point on a percentage. So pretty much nothing. The TM30 color maps perfectly overlap from not having the lens on to having the lens on to having it in spot. So the transmission's pretty pure, but there is a decrease in Kelvin. So when you pop the lens on in flood, you do get a 54 Kelvin decrease, or a decrease of 54 Kelvin in your CCT. And when you spot up at full spot, you get a additional decrease of about 150 Kelvin. But apart from that, the optical transmission is pristine. Okay, so let's get into the technical stats of the unit. So basically with no modifier on as a raw cob, this thing was spitting out 5,361 Kelvin. Now Aputure promised 5,500 Kelvin with a plus or minus 200 Kelvin range, so this thing's falling within that. All right, so let's talk about the DUV score, which indicates how close this thing is to pure white. So it's coming in at plus 0.0013 DUV, which means it is ever so slightly green. Now to put that into some real terms perspective, if you had the lightest correction gel you could put on it, which is a 1/8, it would be twice as much as you need. Now let's talk about color rendering. So this thing is spitting out a healthy TLCI score of 98. However, color vector testing reveals that a more accurate score would be 93. Now let's put that into some perspective. A small HMI outputting about this much light, say a 575, you'd be looking at typically somewhere between 85 to 89 as your color score with color vector testing. Other lights in this class, 300 watt open face cobs, are scoring typically about a 91. So this thing has actually got very good color render. Now here are the individual CRI scores. And here is the spectrum analysis. Now let's talk about the unit with the reflector on. Now, I don't want to give you any of my scores because they will be inaccurate because as I stated early on in the video, this is the prototype first release. It's not the finished product reflector, so this needs some work done to it. So in terms of finding out what the finished product is capable of, I would honestly suggest having a look at what Aputure claim on their website. Pretty much with all the readings I've taken, so all the readings for this, all the readings for the Fresnel mount, basically they all back up what Aputure claim. So Aputure are actually pretty honest in what they state their lights can do. Okay, so that's the 300D Mark II from Aputure. Now, I'm actually in the marketplace at the moment to buy cob lights. So this has been a very interesting review for me. And I'll just finish up this review by saying that I'm going to be buying a mixture of stuff, but I'm definitely going to have at least one of these in my kit, possibly two. And here's the big thing for me with testing this unit, the big reason I'm thinking about having a couple of these. And this is from a rentals perspective. This thing would be incredibly hard to destroy. You'd have to be a special kind of idiot to damage this unit in normal operation, whereas other units I've looked at are pretty damn good, but they're not as indestructible as this. So that's one of the reasons that I'm going to have at least one of these in my kit. The second reason is the projection mount, which I can't show you yet because it's still under a media embargo, but I'm going to call that thing as the game changer. Okay, so possible negatives with this thing, it is not the brightest Bowens cob mount light on the market. So that might be a negative for you, but pretty much everything else is a positive. The thing is just amazingly built. I'm Andrew Locke, see you on the next episode of Gaffer and Gear.